Psychoanalysis, nostalgia, hope in longing. Namaste. Nostalgia has been largely seen as a costly regression and a defensive action in psychoanalysis. However, nostalgia is a world in itself. Conversation today rolls out the world of nostalgia and its many flavors. Guide in conversation is psychoanalysis consultant Dr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
So, how do we start in the present a journey into the past?
The journey in the present into the past is commanded by the present and the past, the outside and the inside. This journey is almost like a pilgrimage. And we set off onto this pilgrimage largely because of events coming from inside or outside. We'll go into it deeper as we go along the discussion. But what happens is nostalgia is a journey into the past and a very deep and moving journey. And as the ship of our psyche is sailing on very turbulent waters, it casts its anchor into the seabed, that seabed of the past, which has an ecosystem of nostalgia where we can find some succor, some anchor, some good place to go by, one hut of happiness in the whole hamlet. And that often is very necessary to keep us going. I'm reminded of a Japanese film in which there is a very good
Mhm.
dialogue. Uh, the dialogue is spoken by a doctor to his nurse who tells him about some person who had a psychotic episode and had come in the morning. The doctor says, life is long and often it gets too lonely. In such times, a bit of madness helps. It's a very different take on the states the psyche passes through. Instead of
Mhm.
having the binary and the black and white of the Western tradition on which DSM and psychoanalysis and psychiatry stands, one can take a view of nostalgia which is more spiritual, more existential, more anchored in holistic thinking. Definitionally speaking, nostalgia is a journey to the past which involves activation of deep longing, a deeply moving state of feelings. And this journey is often pleasurable, the pleasure often with a touch of melancholy. And the traveler is no less than a pilgrim because it's almost like a pilgrimage inside to those places which now seem our saviors, now seem holy. We don't know what they seemed like when they actually occurred, but now when we look where we are, those places seem very pleasant, very anchoring, very supportive. Those places seem like hamlets of hope. So one can start with the definition of nostalgia here. It's a journey, it's a deeply moving journey into the past, often pleasant, the pleasantness often with a touch of melancholy.
So, how do we board this ship to the past?
We board this ship uh, guided by events from the outside or inside. The outside events can include meeting old friends, which can take us into nostalgia. Some company launching a retro product collection, and we go into nostalgia. Some old place being torn down for redevelopment, and we go into nostalgia. Some old movie or song being played somewhere, and we go to nostalgia. We pass by our old school, and we go into nostalgia. Somebody says something we have heard after years and we go into nostalgia. So somebody has an anniversary, say a college anniversary and the get together, and we go into nostalgia. So there are events in the outside world which literally bring us memories of those gone by years, and that is one way to go into nostalgia. And the second way is the events inside, and they are far more deep and moving events.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you look at people, one way to divide people is to divide them into three. Those who are successful, they live in the future. They are planning big things, they are planning what to do, and they are constantly thinking about future and how to make it happen. So those who are successful, they live in the future. Those who are just responsible may not be so successful, just
Mm-hmm.
rolling on in life, but
Right.
comfortably placed. So those, the second category, I say they are the responsible types. They live in the present looking after their families and themselves. There is a third group which is neither successful nor responsible. And this is the group with which life has been very hard. So they don't see any promise in the present and the future, and then there is nowhere to go except the past. So they live in the past. And this is the group which goes far more into nostalgia than anyone else. In fact, this group is not a small group. This would be almost 20-25% of the population. And we are, of course, referring to mid age and post mid age.
Yes.
And often we remember, at least in India, we remember the uncle who used to always tell stories of the past. In every society, there
Right.
used to be some uncle who would not be dreaming about a future, who would not be so much involved in the present as much in the past. So it is this group which goes far more into nostalgia, with whom life has been very hard. So one event that takes you back, the inner event, is the life being hard in the present and future, and seeing no hope in the present and future. So this is one reason why we go back. The second reason is the midlife crisis. The midlife crisis makes us go back for mourning, for closure, for reintegration. So that again makes us go back. That's an inner event making us go back. Old age, as we start approaching the terminal years, that naturally takes us back. Then uh, separation or death of somebody close to us, that also takes us into nostalgia, especially related to that person. So separation and death, repeated tragedies. When
Mm-hmm.
too many tragedies happen in the present or in the near past, we have no choice but to go to the past, which is very early past. Because that is where something was pleasant, something was good. And we have to retrieve that good, protect that good, and cast our anchor into that good to save whatever good we can save for ourselves inside of us. So, uh, and then the crisis of the good inside, that when you have too many bad experiences, then the good inside is threatened. And then the crisis is how to preserve whatever good is inside. And that also can be an inner event leading us to nostalgia. So, nostalgia just doesn't happen like that. There are very understandable reasons why it happens, and it's very human, it happens to everybody. Because these reasons also happen to everybody to some extent. So, it's a very important phenomena of psychic life, unfortunately, not explored enough by psychotherapy, especially by psychoanalysis. It's a very important part of the psyche, especially after 35. And these are some of the reasons from the outside world and the inside world why we go into nostalgia. Often that can be the only way one can experience something good and pleasurable if one has had too many defeats in the real world.
So far, what you have been explaining, it sounds like nostalgia is supposed to be some kind of a positive uh, going back to the past. While in the therapy space, we do integrate a lot of positivities there from the past experiences. Can we say it is one of the coping mechanism of the psyche
It is.
or a
It is.
learning mechanism?
It is many things. We'll see what all it is. But you rightly pointed out one of the things that it is, and that is it is a very good coping mechanism. It's a very good rejuvenation mechanism. It's a very good saving mechanism. So when we talk about saving the good in us, we should go back to clients' original ideas on saving the good in us.
Mm,
That in early life, if one had too many bad experiences of the bad breast, and there were too little experiences of the good breast, one keeps the split open because if one were to integrate the two, nothing good will survive the onslaught of the bad. And if that happens, that's a tragedy because
yes.
that is like pure surrender to Thanatos, the death instinct. And if there is pure Thanatos and the pure surrender to it with an empty playground and no contest, that is a recipe for disaster, for suicide. Because at a very deep level, if we look at the universe, we look, we live in a universe where we don't find a self-regulating intelligent force which leads to equilibrium. We always find equilibrium which is reached because of two opposing forces stopping in some proportion and creating some harmony of some proportionate mixture. So that
Right.
being the nature of the universe, that same is true in our body also. That we don't
Mm,
have a intelligent self-regulating death instinct or life instinct. The equilibrium, the psychic equilibrium is achieved by the algebraic sum of coupling of the life instinct and the death instinct. So in order to preserve little good, which can be the representative of the life instinct in us, we keep the split open and not integrate the two. The same happens in the adult stage. That if there are too many bad experiences and too little good experiences, we can't actually bridge the split of the adult age also. We have
right.
to keep the two separate and not integrate them. The split then is a coping mechanism. And then what we see is that we keep the split open and we keep the memories of early life as they are. And then the going back into nostalgia, we go back into that very good part of the past which we have preserved by the keeping the split open. So the nostalgia
That
then becomes a anchor, a station to preserve the good that there is. It then becomes a nucleus around which all the good accumulates because left alone, small pieces of good cannot survive. So then what it becomes is does not become a moral question, it becomes a deeply therapeutic question that the destruction or the accumulation of the negative experiences has been so high that the only way to preserve something good is by keeping the good away from the bad.
bad.
And that good then becomes a station where nostalgia lives. So then we have one island among 10 where vegetation is, where life is, and that is where nostalgia lives. And we have no choice but to go there to keep our will to live alive and provide us with some pleasure, some support, some anchor, some safety, some bliss at the breast, some good breast to which we can go back to. So then nostalgia becomes a very therapeutic, healing. safety providing station.
You mentioned about the crisis of the good inside. So, can we go deeper into the crisis of the good inside?
The crisis of the good inside often has to do with early life losses, early life attacks, early life difficulties of envy and greed, and uh, too much of death instinct. And that does not allow adequate amount of good experiences to be internalized inside. And this is very important because if a good, the core tendency of the psyche in early life is to internalize whatever is available.
Hmm.
Now, if good experiences are not available, it internalizes whatever is there. And we have to be very careful about the internalization of the good, reliable, stable object, how critical that is. Because if you internalize a good, reliable, stable object, two things happen. That internalized object has a shelf life, and till that shelf life is, it radiates goodness throughout. So it not only builds the psychic immune system, it also helps in strengthening the biological immune system. And these are clients' ideas, not my ideas. So the internalization of a good object is very critical. So till its shelf life is there, like if somebody is present in front of you who is good and safe, you internalize. Now, if that person goes away, for some time this internalization stays, after which the loneliness is felt. So there's a shelf life of internalized objects. And that till the shelf life is there, these good objects radiate goodness and help enrich our psychic and the biological immune systems. And till they are there inside, they also provide a template to our own system to create good objects, learning from that object inside. Make a Xerox of it, of some degree.
Mm-mm.
Individual, of course, not a copy, but inspired from it, make a copy. So that when the shelf life of that object is over, our own internally created good object remains inside of us forever. That is how the dependence on the outside object is slowly overcome. But if the internalization is not complete, then we are dependent on outside objects.
True.
Because the moment the shelf life is over, we start feeling that loneliness, that anxiety, that demotivation, that depression, and we have to go back to objects. So this is very critical, that internalization of a good object. And if that has been uh, done and done well, then nostalgia takes us there, to that part where some good object has been internalized and is always with us. So nostalgia then becomes
That
a
happens
journey to be
somewhere in the
continued.
platonic love, somewhere in the platonic love and big faith things. I think that is the good omnipotent object, and its nostalgia is taken into that island of healing, which stays, and the person can just navigate the rest of the life holding on to the flavors of it.
And much of it may be unconscious.
Even with art forms, people do that,
Yeah,
poets and all.
correct.
Yeah.
And even you see in spirituality that
Yes.
initially when people take sannyas, they live in ashram with other colleagues. And only at advanced levels of development, they go and live all alone in the cave. Because in the cave, the moment you leave the ashram for a day or two, the shelf life of objects will be there. And then, as the shelf life is over, you slowly start feeling loneliness. And then all the difficulties of loneliness, biological and psychological, will come in. So, only if you have internalized good enough objects and in good enough measure and in a good enough way, that you can always have good objects inside and you can live in a cave for a long time. So, in different ways, they would be looking at internalizing these good objects and maintaining the goodness inside. Not using these words, not using these techniques, but in some techniques of spirituality which they are using in their schools. So that is very important. That if that has happened, then nostalgia can take us there. And if that has inadequately happened and nostalgia happens, maybe we are given an opportunity to expand, enrich, and strengthen that good island within ourselves. So, nostalgia then is not only a coping mechanism, it's also a occasion to strengthen and develop ourselves. Schopenhauer often
So,
said about life, a pessimistic view of life of his was he used to define life as endless pain to a painful end.
ah,
So, if life is very hard and one starts thinking on these lines, then nostalgia comes in as a savior and helps us to uh, save the goodness, develop the goodness in the face of all the darkness and the difficult experiences we are having as adults. And much of it may have to do with hard luck.
what you're sharing just comes from an observation of the current times. These days, people are not encountering this nostalgia due to the fast pace of the life which they have adopted to. So, nostalgia needs a deep processing inside of us also.
Correct.
While
This
like they've gone the way when people used to talk about childhood, now people are just running ahead. So it's I think there is an ample of time needed to process this unconscious phenomena within the psyche, to
very true,
extract the essence and juice and revisit and reintegrate, revisit and reintegrate.
very true. If you really sit and have an idea of a good life, it will not match with the rush of the modern life. The rush of the modern life is deeply pathological. Just because everyone is into it does not become it becomes normal. If everyone has COVID, that doesn't mean the COVID doesn't remain a disease. So just because everyone is into pathology of rushing around, it's a very pathological situation. In fact, if you look at the optimum pace in life, it's much less than the pace at which we are living. It is not the pace of the bullock cart, but also not the pace of the trains and the cars that we have. It's somewhere in between.
True.
So the optimum is somewhere in between where we have adequate time to go into ourselves, to go into nature, go into mythology and tradition, go into villages and people, and then only we can find our natural anchor. In fact, uh, it's very difficult to uh, look at the present being free from the present. German philosopher Hegel used to say something very important. He used to say to see the present with the eyes of history.
Mm,
It's a very difficult thing to do, not easy, but it's very uh, wise thing to do. And
indeed.
if we look at it from that wide perspective, we realize that what we feel as normal and life is always like this kind of thing is actually a very short-lived phenomena of the post-80s world.
Mm,
It's only post-80s that this pace has come to become normal. Otherwise, life used to be very slow and peculiar to industrial revolution.
yes.
So this is an aberration, an exception. This is now how we were most of the time in our history. It is just that we don't consider the longest periods of history when we were not like this. And again, we will slow down and go back because it's very unnatural.
Unnatural.
So, one of the ways to go back is uh, to restructure every day. If that cannot be done, then at least go for a 4 day work week. So, that can leave some time for people to do the non economic activities. In fact, economics has hijacked the entire human life, which is a deeply pathological sign on a social scale.
True. So, talking about nostalgia psychoanalytically, what is there? How to define it? How to see it?
Psychoanalytically, we can see it in many ways. Nostalgia is a defense, it is a regression, it is a longing, it is a closure, it is a hope, it is a ego strength, it is activation of the life energy, it is preservation of good, it is necessary for psychic survival and equilibrium. It can also be a reason to live, it can also be a very good tool for quality of life. It can be also a very good tool for uh, releasing the artistic potential in us. So it's all of this. Uh, Nostalgia also is art. It's also a canvas of our dreams left half and injured. Nostalgia is also a sweet road to the wounded past awaiting healing. It is also an integration, development, and enrichment of the program of life, especially after midlife crisis. And it's also, in a way, a developmental preparation, if you look at it from Jungian point of view, to navigate through the midlife crisis and enter the archetypal stage of the old wise man. Because both of them require going back and reintegrating our past. So, from a psychoanalytic point of view, it's a uh, it's one entity which actually uh, leads to many phenomena, leads to many things inside the psyche, and that can be leveraged by psychotherapy. Unfortunately, it has not been done so far. It's only now that people have started talking about nostalgia in positively. Otherwise, it was talked about very negatively as a regression.
Okay.
It's like it was like there is a deficiency in reality acceptance, and therefore there is a regression to the infantile past. So it was a lack of courage where you are going back because you don't have the strength to withstand the present. So it was seen as a pathological regression and not as inevitable part of human life and not as a necessity and not least of it as something uh, very rich and enriching.
But in many cases, it would be a pathological regression,
It can be
not necessarily as I said, it's a coping, it seems like a coping mechanism. So it's an escape from the present, which is painful or not so relishful and not so empowered. So you go
correct,
back to your childhood
true.
where you have had that freedom, probably, or maybe free will, maybe no responsibility. So nostalgia can be sitting in that form. I think for many, it is still like that.
Uh, for one group, it will be pathological when it is hijacked by narcissism, inertia, indolence, and indulgence. But for most, where this trip is temporary, it becomes a positive aspect.
Like if we see if we apply the Jungian archetype of an old wise man, gone the days when people used to sit around those people who would have their own life stories to be shared, and from there we get the life lessons and learnings and experiences. Now that is somewhat nostalgia we all refer here right now, but
One part. Second part is just look at psychoanalysis. It's always about going back,
back
right? So the very method is of going back. Now, nostalgia,
therapeutic setup itself
yeah,
is similar,
even the couch is designed for regression. The psychoanalytic frame is designed for regression. So
right?
this is like one more going back. So this is not unlike the mainstream method of psychoanalysis. It is just that uh, it was wrongly stemmed because of a few instances that the whole of it is pathological regression, infantile regression, inability
Mm-hmm.
to have reality acceptance or reality adjustment. It's only recently that people realize that constructive going back, reliving, reintegration can actually strengthen in the long run our reality acceptance, reality adjustment, and ego strength, and also can release artistic and spiritual potential. So, This is where the thing is that uh, on the whole, for most, it's a very positive movement. For a few, it can be pathological when hijacked by, as I said, narcissism and the three I's of inertia, indulgence, and indolence.
Endurance. Hmm. So, is it not living in a selectively created dream, preferably where you have the ticket to go back? It's on demand.
Yeah. Counter to that would be this response that man lives with his dreams.
Mm.
Man dies when the dreams die. So is suicide better than nostalgia? No. Is depression better than nostalgia? No. Is isolation of affect better than nostalgia? No. Is a bad quality of life one regrets every moment better than nostalgia? No. So if nostalgia allows a diversion from these things, allows for some coping of these things, some healing of these things, some prevention of these things, then that nostalgia becomes a very constructive nostalgia. And often we see this that there is a healing movement, a happiness, a wholesomeness, a integration which is felt after a nostalgic visit, a
Is it?
nostalgic experience. Uh, I often say man has to go back. We all have to go back to places where we once were, with people we once were with, and re experience, revisit, and reintegrate. I often ask people who come to me to go back to their schools, to stand in front of the schools when there is recess period and children are coming out, or when the school gets over and children are going out. Stand in front of the school and have some cup of tea or some snacks they used to have as children. It's very necessary to relive those moments. And that reintegration can at times even lead to mourning. It can even lead to revisit of a regret. It can even
Yes.
lead to revisit of a guilt or a shame. It can even lead to consideration only if I did this and if it were to happen again, I would do this. So it can be a very illuminating, light providing, healing moment if one goes there. I often go to places of my childhood and it's a deeply moving experience. It's a different kind of a nostalgia and a very healing nostalgia.
Mm-hmm.
And often feel from personal experience and that of others that it's a very constructive and a deeply healing and deeply enriching and potential creating and potential unleashing experience. And if you look at the experience itself, there is a living quality to it, a deeply moving emotional quality to it. There is a positivity to it, there is a hope in it, there is a longing in it. Nostalgia
A
is a hope,
sweetness.
yeah, there's sweetness in it. Nostalgia is a hope in longing, a different kind of a longing difficult to articulate, a longing that we have and we know cannot be fulfilled. But we find it good to be with that longing. That longing is a sweet, bitter thing, more sweet and less bitter. It is not a sad, only sad longing. It's not torturous longing. It's a sweet and sour longing, and that longing is very enriching in the inner world. And there is a poetic quality to nostalgia.
Yes.
There's no doubt about it. It's a deeply poetic experience, and there is a healing quality to it. Often, by the time the nostalgic experience ends, so much of catharsis has happened, so much of bliss has been felt, delight has been felt, a different kind of pure happiness has been felt. Takes us to those stations we had forgotten exist. It's like an old railway station everyone has stopped going to. It's only when, by fortune, you get down a train and the train goes away and you are there and you realize and you start looking at story that is embedded with everything that you find in that station. And of course, those stories are only yours. Nobody else is going to experience it as you do. So it's a very subjective, poetic journey. Those who have not experienced what you have experienced can't understand what it means to you. Only you can understand what it means to you because it's your world, not their world. Nostalgia is so very useful. I should not say useful, very enriching, deeply moving.
It also brings in a different kind of a life force, that of a um, childlike joyous fountain within, which starts, refreshing your present self, takes away the exhaustion of the current times.
And it takes
So
you into
thus,
a dream world, dreams which you half dreamt, half lived, half forgotten, half screaming to come up.
if we see those half lived, half experienced versions, which we do, we integrate them in the moments of nostalgia, and does that mean nostalgia have a healing potential?
We do. Unless we try to make nostalgia an everyday experience and it becomes routine, then we don't. But so far as nostalgia remains nostalgia, we do. 1 minute is left. Continue in the next part.
Thank you.
Thank you.